Disney's 1977 movie The Rescuers tells a simple but effective story about a pair of mice rescuing a kidnapped girl. However, the movie's production history was anything but simple. Like a bottle tossed in the sea traveling from New Orleans to New York, it was quite a journey. And before we can get to talking about the villainess, Madame Medusa, we need to start at the beginning with the original books. The Rescuers was based on a series of 9 books by Marjorie Sharp. Starting in 1959, the stories focused on the Prisoners' Aid Society, an organization of mice who dedicate their lives to comforting prisoners. The 2 most proactive mice, Miss Bianca and Bernard, instead focus on actually rescuing people in need. The stories are an odd mix of dark and light. They often have sadistic, ruthless villains who put their victims into some truly wretched situations. At the same time, they all have a sense of lighthearted whimsy in spite of the peril the heroes find themselves in. It all makes for an interesting, enjoyable read. The Disney adaptation went through a surprising number of drafts, so I'll be touching on the 4 books that are the most relevant. The first story, The Rescuers, has Bernard meet Miss Bianca for the first time. They travel to Norway with a sailor mouse, Nils, to rescue an imprisoned poet. The poet is trapped in an especially cruel jail called the Black Castle. It's not entirely clear why he's there in the first place, but we're meant to assume he's either innocent or his crime wasn't a fraction as bad as his punishment. The main villain, the head jailer, does not get much development, but his cat, Mameluke, proves to be a major obstacle for the mice. Against all odds, they live up to the book's title and rescue the poet. The sequel, Miss Bianca, has the mice trying to rescue an orphan named Patience from the mysterious Diamond Palace. The palace is owned by a crazed, cruel woman known as the Diamond Duchess. A thoroughly disagreeable person, she had all her mates quit on her at once for her unpleasable attitude. She had mechanical women made to replace them, but found that she missed having someone she could be cruel to. So, she had Patience kidnapped and brought to be her slave. The villains in these books pull no punches. They are some of the most evil characters I think I've encountered in children's literature. Assisting the Duchess is Mandrake, her major domo. Mandrake is not there by choice either. He apparently committed a terrible crime years ago that went unpunished. The Duchess somehow found this out and forces him to serve her as blackmail. Mandrake isn't a terribly good person by any means, but he's in a pretty wretched predicament. In the book The Turret, Miss Bianca finds a prisoner trapped in an old building. It turns out to be Mandrake. When Patience escaped, thanks to Bernard and Bianca, the Duchess had Mandrake imprisoned himself. Now Miss Bianca needs to rescue him, as long as he promises to truly become a better person. In addition to Mandrake, the Duchess also has a pair of bloodhounds, Tyrant and Torment, used to hunt down Patience when she makes her daring escape. She has a few other assorted henchmen, but Mandrake and the dogs were the only ones who are loosely adapted by Disney. Another relevant villain appeared in Miss Bianca in the Antarctic. After a rescue mission goes awry, Bernard and Bianca end up trapped in Antarctica. Bianca finds herself the prisoner of a crazed emperor penguin who wants to force all the other penguins to build a giant statue of him. It's one of the odder entries in the series. Like the Aristocats, development on the Rescuers movie actually began when Walt Disney was still alive. The first draft appears to be pretty close to the first book. A children's author is imprisoned, this time in Cuba. Concept art shows Bernard, Miss Bianca, Nils, and several other mice going on a harrowing journey to save him. They have several run-ins with Mameluke the cat, here looking a lot like Lucifer. Like in the book, the cat appears to be the most developed of the villains, with the guards coming across as more generic. I've heard a few reasons why Walt rejected this idea. It was too dark, too political, and too reminiscent of World War II, which was not that far from memory at the time. The concept art certainly looks striking, though. The next idea was hatched after Walt's passing. Perhaps remembering why he turned down the first pitch, this one went in a much more whimsical direction. The story would begin at a zoo where a crafty emperor penguin lives. Concept art shows him as a con-man type. He meets an easygoing bear, called Willie in some drafts, and later named Louie after his intended voice actor, Louis Prima. The penguin would convince Louie to escape the zoo to join him in the South Pole. There, the penguin would force Louie to perform for him and the other penguins, keeping him as a prisoner. The bear would send a message in a bottle, leading Bernard and Bianca to come to the rescue. This plot was also scrapped. The South Pole wasn't an appealing setting to the animators. The stark white snow and the black and white penguins were too drab. That, and the Emperor Penguin wasn't an effective villain. No one could buy the bear not being able to stand up for himself against a bunch of birds. Finally, the plot was changed to reflect the second book, Miss Bianca. The little orphan girl Patience became Penny, the Diamond Duchess, eventually, became Madame Medusa, Mandrake became Snoops, and the Bloodhounds became crocodiles, Nero and Brutus. Many liberties were still taken. Medusa doesn't want to keep Penny as a slave forever, just until she can recover a particularly large diamond. She's not a duchess anymore, but a greedy pawnshop owner. Snoops is not working for her because of blackmail, at least as far as we know. The setting became the evocative Devil's Bayou in Louisiana. For years, animator Ken Anderson had wanted to do a movie based on the Catfish Bend books set in swamplands. He even reformatted some of his Chanticleer concept art for the production. We can see the villainous Renard the Fox become Mr. Grey. Although Catfish Bend wound up just as doomed as the Chanticleer movie, its spirit lives on in this particular bayou. As for Louis the Bear, he was actually going to be kept in the movie for a while. He would have filled the role that eventually went to Rufus the Cat and let the mice know about Penny. Unfortunately, Louis Prima fell gravely ill during production, and the character was cut for good. With the production history out of the way, let's venture deep into the swamp and meet our colorful cast of villains. If you were listening closely a minute ago, you'll notice I said that the Diamond Duchess eventually became Mad Medusa. There's actually one more hurdle we have to cross before we get to our actual villain, but it's a very important one. It really puts everything about Medusa's character into perspective. Before she was Madame Medusa, she was Cruella de Vil. The character had proven to be so popular, Disney considered bringing her back as the main villain of a completely unrelated story. No longer dealing in furs, she's come across the pond to kidnap a human child this time. As far as we know, she wasn't interested in making a coat out of Penny, and just wanted to use her to get the diamond. There's a bit of concept art of Cruella, complete with a new gator skin outfit. Whether Nero and Brutus were meant to be her companions is unknown to me, nor is the relationship they had to whoever Cruella is currently wearing. Deciding not to do a sequel, they instead made her a completely new character. I personally think this was a smart decision. Cruella is a fabulous character, but her presence would have been too distracting. They went through a number of different designs for Medusa. We have a large, older woman who sort of resembles Ursula body-wise. There's also a particularly scary, skull-faced take on the character by Ken Anderson, whose curling hair evokes the snakes of the mythological Medusa's head. To take the Gorgon comparison even further, she has a pair of intense, piercing eyes. Medusa's final design, and in fact most things about her, can be credited to animator Milt Kahl. Kahl was a very competitive man. This was going to be his final movie before he retired, and he wanted to end things with a bang. The residue of Cruella was still on the character, but Kahl didn't just want to imitate her. He wanted to outdo her. Or rather, he wanted to outdo Cruella's main animator, Mark Davis. On his wonderful blog, animator Andreas Deja points out that some of Medusa's features are the inverse of Cruella. Cruella's nose is small, Medusa's is more distinct. Cruella's jaw is pointed and skull-like, and Medusa barely has a chin. Altogether, there's something so appealingly unappealing about Medusa's design. She's not a very attractive woman, but it's very hard to take your eyes off her. Her bulging eyes, crooked teeth, wild hair, and other features are pretty unforgettable. And if nothing else, she certainly has confidence in her appearance based on her sashaying around. Milt Kahl described it as an aging sexpot attitude. He might not have topped Cruella as a whole, but the animation in this movie is some of his best. Kahl considered this to be his favorite character to work on as well. Just like Davis based Cruella's mannerisms on a woman he knew and was not fond of, Kahl had his own secret model. Unfortunately, it was his ex-wife, Phyllis Bounds. Bounds, who was also Walt Disney's niece, was quite an accomplished person herself, acting as a writer, artist, and producer in a number of projects over the years. Of course, Medusa's voice actress deserves plenty of credit as well. Geraldine Page had a long, successful acting career. Although Medusa is her only voice acting credit, she did a wonderful job, apparently nailing all her lines in one take.
You get down there and find the big diamond, or you will never see that teddy again!
Madame Medusa is the owner of a pawn shop, but she wants bigger and better things. She's become obsessed with a pirate treasure, a diamond called the Devil's Eye, located in the Devil's Bayou swamp. She's figured out the general location. Unfortunately, it's somewhere down a deep pit that's too small for her, her associate, or her beloved pets. The solution? Kidnap a little orphan girl and force her down the black hole to retrieve the diamond. Once again, it's very hard not to compare her to Cruella. Cruella is implied to have access to lots of great fashions, but she grows obsessed over her dream coat, made of Dalmatian fur. We see that Penny has found many diamonds and jewels in her search, but Medusa insists that she bring back the Devil's Eye, or she won't be satisfied. They also share a temper and are both terrible drivers. Medusa's car even resembles Cruella's, right down to the color scheme. I'd say what differentiates them the most is a bit more subtle at first. Both women fly into a rage when they don't get what they want, but Medusa still comes across as the more childish of the two. When Cruella is angry, she's genuinely scary and intimidating. Even when she's in a good mood, people seem hesitant around her. She's not as classy as she thinks she is, but she can really take full command of the room. Madame Medusa lacks these qualities. When she's angry, she more resembles a child throwing a tantrum than someone on the warpath like Cruella. Whenever an object is uncooperative, a suitcase, a motorboat, a rifle, she just hits it until it starts working. It's a childish way of handling things, but it does seem to work. Thankfully, she doesn't try this tactic on Penny. She's awful to the girl in different ways. The biggest one, of course, is child endangerment. She makes Penny search the dark pit for the elusive diamond daily, but the tide seems to only stay low for a very short amount of time. Fed up, Medusa finally just forces her to stay down there until she finds it, tide or no tide. If Penny did drown down there, which she almost does, Medusa would probably just kidnap another kid without a shred of remorse. Obviously, Penny just didn't try hard enough. It would be her fault, not Medusa's. The scene where Penny and the mice barely manage to recover the Devil's Eye is probably the most thrilling scene in the whole movie, with a very real sense of danger. The girl's entire life is in the hands of a woman who doesn't care if she lives or dies. The following battle on the riverboat is a slapstick chase with yakety-sax sounding music. It makes sense, since no final battle could really compare on a dramatic level with the rising water in the black hole. Outside of the kidnapping and endangerment, Medusa's cruelest moment comes shortly before Bernard and Bianca meet Penny. Medusa puts on a transparently false grin and tries to appeal to Penny, playing the good cop to Snoops' pathetic bad cop. The girl asks Medusa if she can please just go back to the orphanage to get adopted, leading to this response.
Adopted? What makes you think anyone would want a homely little girl like you?
Penny leaves without a word. The following scene, set to a heartbreaking song, shows that with this sentence, Medusa has broken her spirit. Penny has been uncooperative and staying down in that pit long enough to find the diamond, so that needs to be changed. Part of me wonders, though, if this was fully Medusa's intent. She's a reckless, impulsive woman whose master plan is incredibly simple. This seems too calculated for someone who doesn't seem that crafty when it comes to psychology. It might be that Medusa is just a callous, cruel person who never thinks of others. Not that we didn't already know that, of course. I know I've spent a lot of this analysis talking about Cruella de Vil. Given that Medusa almost was Cruella, it's impossible not to compare the two. Regardless of who you like more, Medusa is at least distinct enough in her own right. Most important of all, she's entertaining. And what would a good villain be without henchmen? Medusa has three: a human partner and a pair of darling pets. We'll talk about Mr. Snoops first. Like Medusa, Snoops' appearance and mannerisms were based on a real person. John Culhane was a journalist and Disney historian. He loved animation and was always hanging around, or rather snooping around, the studios, wanting to see the process up close. During production, Culhane asked Milt Kahl to speak to his students at New York's School of Visual Arts. Kahl drew a poster for the event, featuring a caricature of Culhane. Wooly Reitherman, one of the Rescuers' directors, saw the artwork and decided they'd use that design for Snoops. While we don't know how Phyllis Bounds felt about being Madame Medusa, Culhane was honored to be Mr. Snoops. He even hosted a TV special in 1983 about the studios.
But I'm not upset. It's a kind of immortality. My great-grandchildren will see me as a short, pudgy kidnapper of little girls.
Culhane would be honored once more in Fantasia 2000 as one of the characters in the Rhapsody in Blue sequence. Snoops' voice was provided by Joe Flynn. Flynn had appeared in nearly a dozen other Disney productions, but this would be his only voice acting role for them. Unfortunately, he died shortly after recording his lines, making The Rescuers his final credit. Based on a piece of concept art, it seems that Snoops was around even when Cruella was the villain. Snoops is pretty pathetic as far as sidekicks go. I'm not saying he's a bad character, but he's probably one of the least effective henchmen we've seen. He fails to intimidate a little girl, he's let her escape several times, and he's too dumb to realize that Medusa is planning to double-cross him until it's too late. He's lucky she never sicked her gators on him. I feel like even Edgar or LeFou could beat him in a fight. The real purpose of Mr. Snoops is to give Medusa someone to talk to. Brutus and Nero are much better at their jobs, but Medusa can't converse or plot with them. The story needs someone like Snoops to be told effectively. If Medusa was always with Penny in the Bayou from the start, the girl would have probably drowned weeks ago. Snoops needs to be there instead. to give Bernard and Bianca enough time to fly to the swamp themselves, and to allow the tension to rise in the meantime. Snoops' ineffectiveness probably kept Penny alive. The black hole with the devil's eye, as stated before, is incredibly dangerous. Penny knows this, and refuses to stay down there too long because of the tide. Snoops always gives in and pulls her out. It's only when Medusa comes there herself that she forces Penny to stay until she finds the diamond. Snoops' constant relenting might imply that he does care for Penny's safety, to some extent, but I disagree. He's still willing to kidnap a child and repeatedly put her in a dangerous situation. The reason he keeps letting her out all the time is because Penny has a stronger will than him. When she says no, she means it. As pathetic as Snoops is, he's still an adult. Some children might obey him without question because of this alone, but Penny, for all her precociousness, has a backbone. If she's not afraid of Brutus or Nero, she's certainly not going to be afraid of Snoops. I'd say Snoops really is as bad as Medusa. He's just spineless. Look at the way he mocks Penny for her getting caught and her reliance on her teddy bear. It doesn't really seem to get under her skin, not like Medusa does, but the thought behind doing this is so incredibly petty. It's all he can do to feel like he's in some degree of control. Snoops is a bully. An ineffective one, but a bully nonetheless.
Now, Teddy, poor Teddy. All she ever thinks about is that simple bear. Now, you behave or I'll let Nero and Brutus have your old teddy bear.
Slapstick almost always comes with the territory of being one of these sidekicks. With that slapstick comes laughter, but often there's also some pity at the back of our minds. While we do feel a degree of sympathy for characters like Fidget or Sir Hiss, I can't muster any for Snoops. He is quite possibly one of the least sympathetic henchmen in any of these movies. I've been incredibly harsh on Snoops, perhaps harsher than I've been on any character thus far. Please don't get the wrong impression. I like him as much as you can like that kind of character. Like I said with Medusa, he's entertaining, which is the key. Everything about him is well done from a technical standpoint, and I suppose someone has to be at the bottom of the sidekick barrel. If nothing else, it was a good final role for Joe Flynn, and a wonderful tribute to John Calhane, who really did appreciate the artistry that goes into these kinds of movies. The more intimidating henchmen come next. Brutus and Nero are a pair of... well, I've used the words gators and crocs interchangeably thus far, and I'll continue doing so. It's not really clear what they are specifically. Alligators would make more sense since they're in New Orleans. However, their size and design seems closer to crocodiles. Some concept art calls them gators, but I've also seen them called crocs in other concept art. Either way, Brutus and Nero are dangerous, which is the most important thing for Medusa. When Penny escapes, which apparently has happened a few times, it's the gators who are summoned to bring her back. Snoops, ineffective as always, is relegated to using fireworks to light up the swamp. But even in the jaws of an animal 5 times her size, Penny remains defiant. Call it bravery or naivete, but she will not be intimidated by the monsters. Snoops, on the other hand, knows just how dangerous these beasts can be. It doesn't help that he probably looks a lot more appetizing than a small child. The Crocs have various grunts and growls supplied by Jimmy McDonald, who also voiced Evinrude the Dragonfly. They never actually speak, though. The lack of dialogue helps make them seem even more monstrous. A similar tactic would be used for Joanna, another reptile sidekick in the sequel. Medusa loves her diamonds most of all, but she does have a place in her heart for her scaly pets. Still, being around Medusa can be hazardous for one's health, even if she likes you. The Crocs still find themselves getting smacked around or accidentally shot at throughout her stay at the riverboat. By the end of it, they've had enough. Medusa, short-sighted and temperamental as she is, never thought her precious babies would bite the hand that feeds them. In fact, they'll take her whole arm. The last we see of Medusa is her clinging to what's left of her ship, with the hungry gator snapping at her. We assume Penny told the police about what she'd been through when she reached the shore, but it's a mystery if the cops ever found Medusa, or what was left of her. Medusa's fate being left in the air is an interesting choice, and it again reflects Cruella. The last we see of her in the original movie is her fuming at the Baddens by her wrecked car. Medusa is in a much worse predicament, but there's still some hope for her. Maybe. Possibly. Who am I kidding? The lady or the tiger? It was the tiger. That woman is Alligator Chow. As for Mr. Snoops, he paddles away, getting in a good laugh at his boss's expense. He seems to have a better chance of survival at a glance, but these are generally uncharted swamplands, and Penny's taken his main means of transportation. I wouldn't be surprised if he met his own demise shortly after. But you know what? Let's give him this little moment. It's probably the best he'll ever have. Before we look at Medusa's further appearances, here are a few trivia tidbits. According to the book The Illusion of Life, an entire sequence with Medusa was cut, and some of the scenes with her and her gators were trimmed. The animators realized that Penny was the one who the audience was most invested in, and felt that the focus should be more on her. Unfortunately, they don't elaborate on what the deleted scenes were. The movie's songwriters, Carol Connors and Anne Robbins, were asked to write a song for Medusa. They tried, but couldn't think of anything. The directors apparently agreed, because they didn't push for the song after initially asking. The Rescuers isn't a musical anyway, so a villain song might not have fit the project. Typically, I go over each movie in the franchise first, before looking at the other appearances of the villains in different media. However, I'm going to take a break from that format this time, because neither Rescuers movie has really gotten much attention in the grand Disney pantheon. Not only that, but most of the references you find to Bernard and Bianca are related solely to the first movie. That goes for villain material as well. It's table scraps compared to other villains, but almost every scrap belongs to Medusa. We'll get to McLeach soon enough, but I think it's better to get through the remaining Medusa and Snoops appearances first. While Medusa's shown up a handful of times, she's still one of the rarer villains. Once again, she's in Cruella's shadow. Obviously, we're not going to get a live-action Medusa origin movie, but you'd imagine that such a fun, flamboyant character would get a little more recognition. Even in the Descendants books, which gave children to Edgar and the Ringmaster of all people, Medusa is absent. Somebody get Serena Valentino on the phone, maybe she can whip something up. Medusa's comic appearances have been pretty limited, only showing up in a few original stories from the Netherlands. As you know, every cartoon villain who's any cartoon villain has tried to steal Christmas at some point. One story has Medusa proving she's worthy by invading Santa's workshop to get at all his presents. Snoops is on hand as well, along with Nero and Brutus. I guess everyone forgave each other. After all, it's Christmas. Another story has her channeling her inner Fagin and training children to be pickpockets. She's also gone from having a pair of gators as pets to a pair of hyenas. I guess she's also channeling her inner Harley Quinn. One of her more innocent appearances has her move into a new house and start playing records incredibly loudly. This riles up the rodent and insect inhabitants, who turn to the Rescuers for help. They succeed in breaking the record player by stealing its crank, but Medusa actually gets a happy ending for once. Snoops shows up with a present, an MP3 player with headphones. Welcome to the 21st century, guys. Medusa and Snoops also appeared in the children's book, Trouble in Devil's Bayou, which served as a sequel to The Rescuers a decade before they went to Australia. After losing Penny, the criminal gang regrouped and began looking for a different swamp treasure. The Devil's Bayou is a real hotbed of pirate loot, apparently. Unfortunately, the dig site is right next to the house of Ellie Mae and Luke. The swamp critters are already sick of the villains, so they send Evinrude to find Bernard and Bianca. According to the book, this is who the message for help is from at the end of the movie. It's Scooby-Doo time! Led by Miss Bianca, the swamp critters pretend to be a pirate ghost and scare away Medusa, Snoops, and the crocodiles, this time hopefully for good. Medusa may have appeared at the theme parks. I say may have, because although there is a promotional photo of her with other Rescuers characters, I don't know if she ever actually appeared beyond this. Even the Nero and Brutus costumes seem to be repurposed from the Peter Pan crocodile. If anyone recalls seeing or meeting Medusa at the parks, please let me know. If we're being generous, and I suppose we must this time, there's also the window displays on Main Street. I found concept art for scenes with Medusa and her riverboat, but the only villains I can confirm appeared were Brutus and Nero. We have a photo of them being worked on, and one of the prop gator heads got auctioned online at some point. Is it Brutus or Nero's head? Your guess is as good as mine. Somewhat surprisingly, there has never been a Rescuers video game. However, Medusa made a fun appearance in the Magic Kingdom mobile game. According to the game, Medusa did survive the movie and has been on the run ever since. She's recently been evicted from her pawnshop. Her landlord didn't want to harbor a fugitive. But Medusa has a plan to get the Devil's Eye once and for all. It's on display at the United Nations, and she actually manages to steal it. Certainly an impressive feat, but Bernard, Bianca, and Penny are able to swap the diamond with a fake right before Medusa strikes. Then, to really hammer things home, they hide in Medusa's riverboat and record her gloating, broadcasting it to the police. Medusa realizes she's been tricked just in time to escape when she hears sirens in the distance. Earlier in the game, Bernard is checking out the riverboat and worries about running into Medusa. He almost wishes Snoops was still around. He could probably handle him. My personal favorite moment is when Medusa vents about a rude, awful driver with skunk hair she almost came to blows with. That's right, it's the Cruella vs. Medusa fight we've always wanted. I'm surprised House of Mouse never took advantage of that one. Now that we've gone through the murky swamps, it's time to head into the bush for the sequel, The Rescuers Down Under, from 1990. It's a whole new movie, a whole new continent, and a whole new villain. McLeach, Percival C. McLeach to be exact, is as ruthless as they come. Despite being released during Disney's unparalleled renaissance, there's frustratingly little information on this movie's development. One thing I know for sure is that the main human, Cody, was originally intended to be an Aboriginal child. CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg insisted on making him white, saying it would play better in theaters. I wouldn't be surprised if Disney wants to downplay that little detail, and that's why there's not as much behind-the-scenes coverage out there. As for the development of the villain, I really only have a few pieces of concept art to go off of. McLeach always seems to have been this rough, gritty, outdoorsy type. Instead of having a Joanna for a henchman, it looks like he was going to have another human at some point. According to some art, he would have been named Gordo, but this scrap sidekick is mostly a mystery. His final design ended up proving a challenge when it came to actually animating the character. Lead animator Duncan Majoribanks felt that they could have loosened him up a little more. His sharp, angular design made it hard to make him move fluidly. While I'll never disparage the hard work and talent of the animators, the person who really made McLeach stand out was his voice actor, George C. Scott. McLeach could have been a generic, thuggish hunter, but Scott infuses him with a mean, sadistic edge and a lot of energy. The recording sessions didn't actually start out that promising. According to director Mike Gabriel, they wanted a performance similar to Scott's character in Dr. Strangelove. Scott began reading his lines softly, sinister, but not as boisterous as they'd hoped. He pushed back against doing a broad performance, saying it was too easy, too obvious. With a little coaxing, he began to slowly get more into the role, really enjoying himself in the end. For the scene where McLeach sputters his way through a river and over a waterfall, Scott even dunked his head in a bucket of water a few times, and doing this was his idea in the first place. The only real point of contention came for the final recording session when he recorded McLeach singing. Scott was in a bad mood due to an injury and refused to sing, saying he didn't find it funny. The extra lines were recorded by Frank Welker. If I didn't have official confirmation on this fact, I don't think I'd have believed it. Welker does a perfect impression. In addition to filling in for Scott, Welker also did the animal noises for Joanna and Marahute the eagle. McLeach is a dedicated poacher. He's very good at what he does, and he loves doing it. His mineshaft hideout is full of animal pelts and remains. I like the detail of the captive Cody sitting on a giant empty tortoise shell in one scene. His monstrous bushwhacker, a triumph for early CGI, makes him the terror of the Outback. The golden eagle is McLeach's white whale, and he'll do whatever it takes to capture her. Kidnapping and threatening a child means nothing to him. Cody is tough, though, and McLeach will have to outthink the boy. Although the hunter is an expert when it comes to outsmarting animals, figuring out how to get into Cody's head is another story. McLeach is cunning, but he's not actually that intelligent. He's not truly stupid either, and he's certainly done well for someone who only made it through the 3rd grade, but he needs to take the time to really think things through. The scene where he tries to figure out how to outsmart Cody, all while getting tricked himself by Joanna, is one of the movie's highlights.
You think you're messing with, you dumb animal? My mental facilities are twice what yours are, you pea-brain.
In the end, McLeach's street smarts, or perhaps bush smarts, prevail, and he's able to manipulate Cody into leading him right to Marahute. Although McLeach is a fully original character, he would have fit in pretty nicely in the original Rescuers books. The villains in that series were defined by their abject cruelty, and McLeach has plenty of that to spare. Lowering Cody into crocodile-infested water makes sense. It's where he first threw Cody's backpack for the Rangers to find. If the boy's body was found anywhere else, it would arouse suspicion. Killing a child is cruel enough, but the joy McLeach finds in the act is sickening to the point where it's funny. He's truly enjoying himself in this moment, right before it all goes south for him. McLeach has a few arbitrary things in common with Medusa. They have a treasure they're after, and they kidnap a child to obtain it, but their biggest similarity is their sidekick. Although McLeach does not have a human partner, sorry Gordo, he does have a reptile. Joanna the Joanna absolutely steals the show. My rule of thumb when it comes to predators in the series is that they have to be more than just hungry beasts following their instincts. There has to be a deliberate malice to their actions. Although Joanna certainly has an appetite, she's plenty evil herself. She's willing to help trap and kill countless other animals for her master. She almost enjoys it as much as McLeach himself. Unlike Brutus and Nero, who never really got much personality development, Joanna actually has a few layers to her. In addition to the nasty predator mode we often see her in, we also get to see her sympathetic side. She might be knowingly dooming animals, but when she's happy or wants to please McLeach, she turns into a scaly hunting dog. There are quite a few moments where she's surprisingly cute, behaving almost like Mickey's beloved Pluto.
Did you know there was a razorback in my truck? Did you? Did you?
There was a razorback in my truck.
But remember, whatever happens, don't move!
She can jump between being a great help and hindrance to McLeach, who is pretty abusive toward the poor lizard in return. In their first scene together, he almost shoots her for knocking him into his trap. As Joanna cowers, she goes from being a frightening hunter to a pitiful victim. Given how willing McLeach was in this moment, I have to wonder how many other Goannas he's been through. I'm fascinated by Joanna's final moment on screen. As she and McLeach find themselves in crocodile-infested water, Joanna manages to crawl ashore to safety. She gives her master a little wave as he continues over the waterfall to his doom. Is she sad to see him go? Or is this relief? I always read it as more of the latter, something like, gee, I'm glad I'm not you right now. Also, she was the one who knocked him in the first place, so this guarantees she won't face any repercussions from the easily angered poacher. It's anyone's guess, though. Truly the Mona Lisa of animated lizards. I had to dig deep to find further appearances of Madame Medusa for other media. Unfortunately for McLeach, he's had even less chances to return. The only thing I found was a tiny cameo in the House of Mouse for him and Joanna. He gets mentioned in the Magic Kingdoms game in passing, but that's it. Why does McLeach get the shaft? It could have just been the movie's timing. Although it was part of the Disney Renaissance, it's the one that fell through the cracks. It's the only one that doesn't fit the animated musical formula that they perfected around this time. Also, the following year's movie, Beauty and the Beast, had its own psychotic hunter, who was ultimately more memorable. No one steals the spotlight like Gaston. Although McLeach and Joanna have fallen by the wayside, I hope this video will remind people how much fun they were. They certainly made the most of their screen time, and the comedic timing of the egg-stealing scene is unparalleled. When it comes down to it, both the main villains in the Rescuers franchise are really quite shallow. They have no motivations outside of greed. And that's just fine, because not only are they a credible threat, but above all else, they're fun. We don't need to know what kind of life drove McLeach to becoming a poacher. We don't need to hear about Madame Medusa's intergenerational trauma. There's so much restraint and nuance in Disney's recent antagonists, to the point that they become forgettable. I love that both these villains were able to let loose and be evil. Sometimes you just need a strong, fun villain for the heroes to go up against. Seeing a few children and some mice overcome such massive obstacles is immensely satisfying, and makes the ending all the happier. Well, speaking of nuance, the next movie we're covering is The Fox and the Hound, which features the grayest morality we've seen so far. I'm aware that Pete's Dragon came before that, but as colorful as those villains are, none of them were animated. Before we cover Amos Slade, we're doing a catching up video. Next time, I'll be covering the various things that have cropped up since I've started this retrospective, and some things I missed. Among other things, we'll be looking at the Twisted Wonderland mobile game, and the remakes of Pinocchio and Peter Pan. Wish me luck, everybody. This is gonna be a doozy.